the Columbus Area Historical Society, and we're very excited to welcome you this evening for part 2 in our Tap into History series, being offered here at Tea Time Wine Bar and Bakery. So thank you so much to Helen Ford for having us tonight. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker tonight, Mr. Peter Kaland. Before he gets started, we're just going to make a couple of quick announcements. So tomorrow, the Historical Society is having our annual meeting for all members to come. We are actually having our annual election, or our elections at our annual meeting. We have some officers who are stepping down from their positions, and so we would really appreciate getting some new members involved, or some folks who have been coming for a while. If you'd be willing to step up into some leadership roles, we would really appreciate that. So that will be tomorrow at 5:45 p.m. at the library annex, next door to the library. And so that's our annual meeting. We're looking for a new treasurer, a new president, and how many other vice presidents? Vice president. Yeah, so it's a good roster. So there's that news. And then next month we will be again having part 3 on the second Tuesday of the month here at Tea Time on November 8th. So we hope you'll join us for that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Peter Kaland. Oh, one more thing. Anne is going around with a sign-in sheet. We would love to get your name and your email so that we can keep in touch with you, send you news about upcoming events and programs. So she's bringing it around so you don't have to find her. And I also forgot to mention we have some of our Christmas ornaments for sale here, and some of our books on the history, and postcards and greeting cards. So if you'd like to support the Historical Society in that way, they're very reasonably priced, and it's really nice to have a part of Columbus history to share. This year's Christmas ornament is for the Rest Haven building in Fireman's Park. It's going to be commemorating its 100th year next year, so we're very excited for that. And if you are interested in making a one-time donation, we do have a donation jar behind the projector here. We'd appreciate that, and but no pressure. And we have membership forms as well on the table up here. Pat Bonus, our lovely longtime treasurer, she's up here if you have any questions. So I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Peter Kaland, former history teacher. I hear he taught a lot of Columbus, and our current president of the Historical Society. And this is a really exciting night, so I will turn it over to Peter. Thank you.
Thanks. I realized putting this presentation together how long it's been since I retired, and when I was scrambling with the PowerPoint, I realized it needed more. One of the things I did when I taught history, which was before I became a librarian, was I started a course in Columbus and local history. It was an elective, it wasn't an advanced class, and it really went quite well. One of the first questions I always ask the kids is, why did people settle here and not 5 miles away? Anybody have an answer for that?
The river.
Okay, number 1, the river. Water power was what it was all about. And finding a source, well, first off the sawmill, and then later on a grist mill, is the number 1 reason for the origins. There are some other things that played a very important part. One of the things, if you know the landscape of Columbus, none of the streets go north, south, east, west. And that's because of the drumlins, when the glaciers, when the glaciers went through, it's like everything's about 23 degrees. And the other thing that you probably know about Columbus is there's a hill, a marsh, a hill, a marsh. And some of the people who grabbed the spots on the hill were far more successful than the ones who grabbed the land that was marshland. The land was marshland. Some of you who served back up to the front will be well aware of that. Another thing that was very important in the beginnings of Columbus was agriculture. This area had quite a few prairies, so there were places that one could farm, and one didn't need to uproot a whole lot of trees. There were some oak openings in the prairie. The other thing that was critical to the development of Columbus was the railroad. I talked to somebody I heard recently who didn't think the railroad had any impact. One of the ways you can see that is you had Elba and Danville. The railroad went through Elba. It didn't go through Danville. Danville had the mill, and that was about it. Elba had 2 canning factories, lumber yard, a cattle, place for cattle, general store, bar. So communities that had a railroad flourished, and communities that didn't have a railroad were kind of left behind. And you can find that in many, many places in Wisconsin. I guess the last thing I would say that helped the development of Columbus was that we just happened to be on, at the time they were trails, now they're roads. We happened to be on a main trail or road from Fond du Lac to Dubuque, and maybe Fond du Lac to Madison. And another main trail was from Columbus to Watertown to Milwaukee. And Milwaukee was one of the early places where goods were sold. So those were kind of things that led to the development of Columbus as we know it now. Land was available. We had a lot of immigrants. Just looking at some statistics, back in 1847, they didn't have a census for Columbus. They had a census for the 3 townships, which I would guess was probably Fountain Prairie, Columbus, what else is around here? Elba, possibly. There were 949 people. By 1850, the village was 288, and shortly by 1855, the township and village together was 1,600 people. Of that 1,600 people, 424 were foreign-born. Well, where did the foreign-born come from? Germany? Some Scandinavians? Welsh?
Europe.
Ireland? Scotland? Some Polish? Right. And one of the ways that we can kind of see that immigrant background is we look at our churches. St. Jerome's was predominantly Irish and also Germans from Bavaria. Zion was Germans from the Mecklenburg area of Germany. The Congregationalists, they tended to come from the East Coast. And I'll be talking more about that a little bit later. The Methodists had 2 groups. There was a English Methodist group, and there was a German Methodist group. And if you're familiar with the churches, the present Methodist Church was the English one. The Masonic Temple was the German English church. So nationalities tended to kind of settle within these churches. There were some other churches Early on, there was a Universalist church, which was very small and didn't last very long. Some of you are old enough to remember here in Columbus that there was a Episcopal church for a number of years. There was also a Baptist church, which never particularly grew. And then there was others that came and went from time to time. And I'm sure I'm missing some additional churches that exist today that didn't exist 50, 60 years ago. Columbus residents were involved in many things. There was a temperance movement, by golly, in front of all of these Germans. These temperance organizations that existed. There were a number of lodges. Most of the early settlers, the businessmen, were members of the Masonic Temple. A number of them were members of the International Order of Odd Fellows, which is, I guess, coming back in Columbus, doing quite well.
Right, yeah.
So there were kind of organizations that these people belonged to. Politics, if you look at Columbia County, you would expect it to be Republican. But if you looked at Columbus, they were both. And they fought probably about as well as they do now nowadays. There was a Democrat paper, the Columbus Democrat, there was the Columbus Republican, the Columbus Journal. Very many times there were these two kind of not getting along with each other. If we think politics is bitter today, if you look at the papers of that time period, they were every bit as bitter. And at times very sarcastic. There was one thing I read in Fred Astaire's story in Columbus. There was a movement of Republicans and Democrats. And then during the Civil War, there was a time of a Copperhead movement, which was kind of an anti-war movement. And they were Democrats that weren't particularly impressed with the Civil War. And I played a part in the politics of the area. There's a story of a guy who was accosted on the street corner and talked into giving up $5 to buy the Republican paper. And he claimed he bought it because he didn't want to be harassed anymore. The same person, it was said, had bought his wife a new dress in 17 years. And so the letter to the editor in the next paper was, well, yeah, you can spend $5 on to prove you're not a copperhead, but you won't buy your wife a dress. So there was a good deal of back and forth. The slides that I have, many of them, come from this booklet, which is a walking tour of Columbus. There's some available here. They are available from the Historic Preservation Committee. In fact, they have hundreds and hundreds of them that we'd be very happy to sell to you. We kind of have two organizations in Columbus that are involved. The Columbus, give me the right title.
Columbus Historic Landmarks Preservation Commission.
Okay. It's a regulatory commission. It's also been super active in Columbus. The pavilion you have today probably wouldn't exist without their efforts. They managed to get an elevator in it. extensive renovations. And so it's been a very active group in preserving history. The other group is we do have a Columbus Area Historical Society. I guess the pitch I'll put in for that is that you're looking for a new home. If anybody has any idea of any real estate, please contact any of us. Many of the businessmen that were in Columbus came from out east. New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. Most of those were the places where they moved west. I guess they listened to Horace Greeley when they said go west on the road. That's why you find amazingly, if you go to our cemetery, you can find a couple of veterans of the War of 1812 that are buried in the cemetery. You know, and when I first saw that, you know, how the heck did they get here? Well, they were the first wave of immigrants that moved west. I was talking about the railroad. I know John probably knows this. Where was the first railroad station? Anybody know? It was along Waterloo Street. The railroad was built to as far as Columbus. There was a turntable, and the station was built. Manning and Waterloo Street.
No pictures exist of that.
I've never seen one.
I haven't either.
Anybody else ever seen? That was 1857. I'm not sure when they, I think probably what happened is when they extended the railroad onto Portage and parts thereafter at that particular point. Some of these people I'm going to mention, you're probably familiar with them for a couple of reasons. This first was the business of Fred Farnham.
Okay. I live in his house.
Oh, you're stealing my thunder.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
And I've been wanting to know which building was his, yeah, okay.
Okay, we'll get back to it. In fact, I'll have you make some comments at that time. Fred Farnham was a very successful merchant. He was in the produce business, and as mentioned, many of these people ended up with fairly substantial homes. Parts of this building were the Swarthout drugstore. Now I realized the drugstore was in about 3 or 4 different places. So this was one place. He was a staunch Republican. He is credited to being the first druggist in Columbia County, the first one to bring drugs to the community and serve as a druggist. Columbus really at times had a head start on Portage and a lot of things. In the second floor of his store, there was offices for James Lewis and Dr. Axel. Dr. Axel was the first physician in Columbus, and I think everybody knows something about James Lewis. He was a lawyer. I don't know if I want to call him a politician. Yes.
You could call him a politician, at least in my view, because he was the 9th governor of Wisconsin.
Right, he was governor, he was lieutenant governor, and I believe he was Secretary of State. And I read someplace that when he ran for Secretary of State, every person in Columbus voted for him. Now, that's pretty amazing when you have staunch Republicans and Democrats.
They wanted to get rid of him.
Lewis was a Civil War governor. He did kind of make a name for himself in his efforts to take care of Wisconsin troops that were injured in battle. I think somebody really should do a program just on the roofs. He was a very beloved person. He was philanthropic. If you go to the library, there's a little nook that has history items in it. And there's a big thick book there. It's a book of the GAR, or the Grand Army of the Republic. And he donated this very fancy book, you know, with gilded covers and things. And then each page was supposed to have a write-up on one of the Civil War veterans. There is a lot of information on the Civil War in Columbus's part in it. Just as an example, there was a Haskell that Frank Haskell lived here for 1 year. His brother lived here for a number of years. Frank Haskell is remembered as the person who wrote the first eyewitness account of the Battle of Gettysburg. And it's considered a classic in American literature. He ended up dying in the war. I think it was at Pearl Harbor about 7 months later, but he had transcribed the book beforehand. Okay, this is what we know it as O'Brien Photography. John helped me out on this one. I believe this was the drugstore.
Have a beer and brandy.
Oh, okay.
That one's hard to see. It's O'Brien Photography.
Yeah. That was Blumenthal and Turner Monument.
Okay.
And they went to the corner.
Right.
They ran right to the corners.
Ice in your brain?
Well,
Was that a garage right next to Bob's photography studio over there?
There was a Standard Oil station built by Elton Henning back in about 1939.
By who?
Elton Henning built it in 1939.
it's a Dalvin Henning.
He lived down on across from the library. Where the annex is. That was the other house before they went down and built that new one.
Yeah, I'm Helen.
Okay.
That's Ernie's Township.
I always heard it was Harmony Corners. Okay, some of the history of this building is when farmers would go to the grist mill to have their grain ground into flour, there often was a huge backup that took place, and you had to wait. And this building was one of the places, this building or the building next door, was one of the places where people waited for to complete their business. For many, many years it was known as Fireman's Tap because the former fire chief was the owner of the tavern.
How old is the building?
I think I heard 1852. And in, I think it's 1912, this building and the building that the people in back are sitting in were combined. I'm not real sure on this one, John. What's the dance studio? Which way I did the Legion at one time.
That used to be the dance studio. That was Markowski's. Stan Dulick ran that store.
Okay, and that was a grocery store?
Yeah, it was a grocery store.
Grocery store.
And then after he sold out, then Army Surplus store went into business.
Okay, one of the very, very successful businessmen in town was a man with the last name of Topps, who ran a cash store. It was a grocery store and a general store. This unfortunately is one of the buildings that was modernized in what looks like the 60s and 70s. But it was a very large store and it was a very successful business. Okay, a very influential person in Columbus was George Griswold. The Griswold family were from New York State. The elder Griswold was slowly going blind, and so when they built this house, they built it as an exact copy of the house in New York, so that he could find things as his sight deteriorated. Griswold was a lawyer. Somebody mentioned land developers. All of these guys were. They all dabbled in that. He had an office where the present library is. In fact, he sold the land to the city at a reduced rate if Columbus would build a library. And Columbus built a library due to probably two groups. One was the Columbus Women's Civic Club, which no longer exists, but existed for many years. He did some really great things. And the city wrote for a grant. They wrote for a grant for a fellow by the name of Andrew Carnegie, who was building libraries all over the United States. And I believe the city got $5,000 from them to do the building. They intended to make the building look like a house, which it does. It's over 100 years old. And serves as our library. Griswold was a businessman. He had the house. He had the office on the corner where the library is. And plus he built a very large building, and we're going to get to that a little bit later.
Pete,
Yes.
I know you're on the library board. Do you have any idea what that Carnegie Library cost? You said he donated $5,000 and they got.
He had $5,000, and it wasn't too much more than that.
Oh, wow. Very nice.
Okay, I'm going to have a story about this that I have a little bit of personal background. This is the house of John J. Sutton on Prairie Street. You notice in this picture, there's this three-story, I don't know if it's not a cupola, three-story tower. John J. Sutton came to Columbus penniless, was a wheeler dealer in many, many ways, and eventually built this house. The next slide is the house that we presently own. This house was built by John Sutton for his son Eugene. There's only one problem with Mrs. Sutton. She now had a daughter-in-law that had a nicer house than she had. And she wouldn't stand for that. So John went out and built the three-story tower. Some other things that I can say about the Sutton. He was a wheeler dealer. He became a lawyer, although he never formally studied law. He was an avid reader. He became a lawyer, and in those days you could read for the law, which he did. He took great pride in suing the railroad. And he sued the railroad for just about anything under the sun. Very famous case. He was into agricultural crops, hide, sugar, wheat, barley, horses. He was into just about everything. And one of the things he realized that is if you drove cattle to Milwaukee, the stockyards, And if you got them there Monday morning, you get a better price for your stock. So on Sunday, he takes off and drives his cattle towards Milwaukee. He gets to, I think it's the Menominee River. There's a bridge they have to cross. And in the course of crossing the bridge collapses. And a number of his cattle, in fact, quite a few of his cattle were killed, plus the ones that were injured, the stockyards didn't want to pay full price for them. So what do you do when something like that happens? Well, of course, if you're a lawyer, you sue. So he sued the township. The township countersued and said, you know what? You were driving those cattle on a Sunday. We have a Sunday blue law, which we had in, I guess, parts of Wisconsin until 1943. So the case moved up and moved up and moved up the ladder, until finally it became a case before the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. And the eventual decision was, I guess, kind of somewhat famous, two wrongs don't make a right. So in other words, both were equally at fault, he because he was doing it on Sunday, and the township for not supposedly protecting the bridge adequately.
What's the blue law?
A blue law said that virtually all businesses are closed on Sunday. As a kid, grocery stores are never open on Sunday. Or gas stations? That I don't remember.
In the bigger towns, they would be, but not.
Yeah,
Not
but
like pharmacies.
you know, the general merchandise store was closed. Everything was closed on Sunday.
Do you think that's why car dealerships are not open on Sundays then? Or no?
I think that law goes back to that time period. They repealed the blue laws, but for some reason or other, I don't know why, but I guess you can't buy a car on Sunday. So the,
What year did this happen?
I'm gonna say probably 1880s, 1890s.
How would he have driven them down there? By horse?
There was a trail, obviously there weren't any particular roads, but there were well-established trails, and you just, I suppose you would probably use a horse, but you would drive them to the market. That was, you know, it took you a while to get there, because I'm not going to even suggest that the roads were of any particular quality at that point in time.
It was the Watertown Plank Road that,
Okay, once you got to Watertown,
yeah,
there was a plank road from Watertown
that speeded things up.
to Milwaukee, which, yeah, did speed things up. And the rest of the road, I would guess, was a trail. One other thing that Sutton did is he got himself thrown off the train one time. He was going from Milwaukee to Columbus, and the conductor asked him for a ticket, which he had in his wallet. He also had a pass through the railroad, and the conductor said the pass wasn't any good. And he said, well, sure it is. And so he refused to pay, so they threw him off the train, and I think it was Brookfield.
Is it moving?
No. At the next station, he was removed forcibly from the train. He then went back to Milwaukee by train, got on the train the next day with a ticket he had in his pocket, and went on back to Columbus. He ended up suing for 39 cents, which was the cost of the ticket from Milwaukee to Brookfield. He was very famous for suing anybody, but in particular the railroad. It got so bad that the railroad, well, I think became the Milwaukee Road, or maybe the Chicago, St. Paul, and whatever it was. Railroad finally decided to give him lifetime pass because it was cheaper to just let him on the train than to be sued every time he turned around. The other part of the agreement was there was a law in Wisconsin at that time that you could not give out free passes for railroads. It had to do with some antitrust things. He also was retained as the local attorney for the railroad. So if you're the attorney for the railroad, you can't sue the railroad. So he's known for suing the Great Northern Railroad, many others. He ended up becoming a wealthy man. By 1910, he had on his stationery J.J. Sutton, attorney at law. In the center is a box, and right is, I own 3,500 acres of farmland in Marshall County, Minnesota, 360 acres in Eau Claire, and 3,500 acres in Cuba on the Isle of Man, which more than likely was a sugar plantation. So some of these guys did quite well for themselves. And he was one of those. Okay, City Hall, little known fact, the property was owned by Sutton and he sold it to the city. Next to it, longtime people around here know there was a building called Brockup's Meat Market. Sutton had a meat market there years and years before that, before he got into some of this other dealing. Building was built in 1992. There's a beautiful upstairs that's slowly deteriorating. 1892. This is an older picture. I think this is when there was still the fire department used to be located. If you look where the city council chambers are, at one time there were 3 doors, which were 3 days for the fire department. And there was a hose door, which they later on took down. Okay, this is the Griswold building. Remember I was talking about Griswold? He built this building. I think the building was actually 3 different stores. There's a mercantile store on James Street. There was a grocery around the corner, and there was a drugstore. And from 1872 to 1883, it served as the post office because the druggist was the postmaster for Columbus. The Bellox brothers came to Columbus from Chicago. They had tried to have a business in Chicago that didn't work out. They had one in Fort Atkinson that didn't work out. And finally they decided to end up in Columbus. They were known for their men's clothing. If you went and bought a suit, you can get it tailored. I don't think they sold anything for women. It was strictly a men's clothing store. Very popular one. I know as a new teacher, when we had to wear suits, that was the yearly Christmas present, was a sport coat from Bellox. This has been was originally built by A.G. Cooper, who was a carpenter and also a cabinet maker. The corner drugstore was a drugstore for many, many, many years under a number of different owners. Culp was one, Ernie Schultz, Lyle Sampson, goes back a long ways. It's another picture of Tops, which is a good sized store. Go on. I think I'm going to start moving along a little faster. Bassett and Davies, again, a mercantile store. It's going. Kitty Corner from Sharrow's, Sergeant Block. And again, these were all merchants. By and large, most of those merchants were former residents of New England. Kurth's Bar. One of the other things we have to realize is that the Kurth Brewing Company at one time was one of the larger brewing companies in the state of Wisconsin. One of the things you did, if you were a brewery, is you probably had 10 or 12 taverns that exclusively, or I think almost exclusively, sold your product. This was one of them. 3 or 4 doors down where the tattoo parlor is was another one. And so within the geographic area, you not only ran a brewery, but you were involved in the merchandising of the product. Okay. Whitney Building. Whitney was an early hotel keeper. The original building burned down in a very short period of time. They rebuilt it. The first floor usually was commercial. Second floor was a hotel. And third floor was dance hall. And I don't know, anybody have anything to say about the Whitney Building?
What did you say the third floor was?
Dance hall.
Actually, the Whitney Building is being sold. The Columbus Downtown Development Corporation is dissolving, and any profit that they make off from the Whitney Building, because it was turned over to them after it was rebuilt. So the Historical Society is hoping we might find a new home there.
We bought it.
I was gonna say, I know it's been sold. I don't know if anybody wanted to say anything about that.
It's been sold? Who won?
Yeah, I did. We did.
Oh,
There you go.
We as the owner of this.
news for us.
Okay, I've been talking quite a while. Let's,
Quick question.
I know.
I've really seen pictures where,
Good thing.
the road now
Yes.
ramps up to it. I thought originally the first floor was kind of down below, right? Was the road still angled like that, or did you access it from stairs and down?
The road was lower, much lower. And you went up steps to get in there.
So I remember seeing pictures of like
I have to
cultural
start plugging her.
patio or porch over, and then like there's a business downstairs, and also you can still see the top of the door down there, right? On the sidewalk?
Yes.
When was the road raised?
Yes. Well, me and Justin.
When was the road raised up?
Oh my God.
Are you done?
Well, in 1954, when they took the cobblestones out of the streets, that was 1954. The road was replaced before. When you look at the older pictures in the city of Columbus, I mean, the streets were really low. And over the years, they kept building.
okay, my notes are a little sketchy here, but I think this is the,
Give another question.
huh?
Over here.
I'm sorry.
And they have another one
What
of
did
those.
you say the first floor was on that?
First floor, commercial, I think at times it was a bar, at times it was a restaurant.
Marcus General Store.
Okay.
Another question?
Another question?
No,
I'm sorry, I was back getting tea.
that's fine.
When you mentioned the Kurth Brewery, growing up, I always heard there was a tunnel of the Underground Railroad that connected the brewery to the Kurth Mansion. Is that just a story, or is there any truth to that?
You know, I've heard things, and John,
I've heard that too.
correct me. I believe there was a tunnel because there was a bottling plant on the opposite side of the street.
What was?
I think the Underground Railroad and, you know, that stuff, no, but there was a tunnel to,
Over in Beaver Dam, on Madison Street, where there used to be a bar there, and they had underground tunnel to the bar, for the brewery.
Helen mentioned that there was a tunnel to here, is that right?
That's what they say, and downstairs there is a bricked up tunnel, or I mean, it could be like where they just brought stuff in the basement.
I have a hammer, I wanna go find out.
very
Be my
frequently,
guest.
very frequently at these businesses,
Well, it's actually out in the
there would
back.
be an opening in the back of the business, or sometimes in the front of the business, that you could open it up and put the goods in it and take it to the basement, so. If one's talking about a tunnel, it very well could be, the way they got products into the business.
Coal-fired furnaces, they had coal dumped in,
When they were burning coal.
and it went into the
That
building.
makes sense.
Could have been because of prohibition.
That would make sense.
I was just gonna say that.
Fire their own.
In northern Illinois,
Yeah,
there's a lot of
yeah.
towns under the old
When the
buildings
kids went
that's
there,
from prohibition, because they would come out from Chicago, Jack Frederick, this, I'm wondering the same thing.
My understanding is the first were well within the law. They made, I think they made the aware,
We got a penny.
and they started bottling store pop
During the war.
during Prohibition. But I think the Al Capone and the speakeasies, plus those types of things you'd find out in the countryside, you probably wouldn't find them within the city. You know, some rural bar someplace, yeah, probably. Okay, Lloyd, anything you want to say about the house?
Well, first of all, I'm down, I'm not low.
Yeah.
What do I want to say about the house? Built in 1867, and my husband's family bought it in 1927. And we have had it in the family ever since. And we say it's haunted by my father-in-law in the upstairs servants' quarter. Whether it really is or not, I say it is.
I agree with you.
Have you seen it?
No, I hear him.
What street is this on?
This is on the corner of James and Lewis, across from the old hospital.
Oh.
How many fireplaces do you have?
Yeah,
Two?
it's a beautiful house, very, a lot of work, but it's gorgeous. I just love it. There's so much that's original, absolutely original. You just
have Okay.
5 more years in your centennial home. Oh, yeah. You see out on the outside, there are 2 windows that are bricked, it looks like the windows are bricked in. Yes. There never was a window there. If you went through those spots, you would be in the spiral staircase. They are there just to make it even with the other window. There's never ever been a window there. It's just fake.
Okay. Kitty corner across the street. This home was owned by the Bellocks. The Bellocks were the gentleman that owned the clothing store. One of the Belloc brothers ended up becoming a physician. This was originally a Victorian house like all the other Victorian houses you saw. And I think it was in the 1920s that somebody got the idea that traveled to the southwestern part of the United States and fell in love with adobe and ended up changing the house to what it looks like now. Okay. Right next door, Wheeler was a banker. There is a story, I don't know if it can be proved, but there is a story that Taft, was President of the United States. William Howard Taft, spoke from the steps of that house. Around the turn of the century, one big event in Columbus was in 1900, the Democratic candidate for President of the United States appeared in Columbus. William Jennings Bryan. Attracted 10,000 people. And this is 1900. The next day, there was an ongoing political
Battle.
political rallies going on. The next day, Robert La Follette, who was running for governor at the time, appeared in Columbus. Not too many people running for president have shown up since. There's a picture that probably many of you have seen from an old calendar of John F. Kennedy with Jack Crombie.
No, Jim Crombie.
Jim Crombie, standing in front of City Hall. I think he's the last candidate, and probably one of the reasons he was here is he was in a hard-fought battle with Hubert Humphrey for the Democratic nomination, and Humphrey obviously had a lot of support being from the neighboring state of Minnesota. This is the top house that's on the corner of Harrison and Birdsey. Again, one of the things about these gentlemen from the New England states is one of the things they figured out very, very quickly is if you're going to build a nice house, build it on high ground. And if you notice the Prairie Street historical area, that's all high ground. Where this house is, it's high ground. And so that's where many of these fine houses were built. I think I need to move on. Sawyer House. Okay, go on. This house was owned by S.A. Andrews. One of the things that was somewhat popular, I know you could buy a house from Sears, Roebuck and Company, but there was also an architect in Tennessee that you could buy a mail order house. And you had some options. I think one of the options this house had was they wanted a bigger porch. You know, there were some modifications. But basically it was a mail order house. And I believe there's 3 of these in Columbus. Skip that one. Skip that. Skip that. Skip that.
Big loop.
Yeah.
Go back 3. Go back 3. I have a comment.
Okay.
This one.
Is that your house?
No. That is, there used to be the dance studio. And back in the 1900s, it was Pietzner and Kettlehorn. So if you've seen any of the plates around town, they gave away Christmas gifts, Pietzner and compliments of Pietzner and Kettlehorn. And
Pietzner and Kettlehorn.
yes, and they actually, I live in the house that they owned, so they just had to cut up through the alley to go to work every night, every day.
Okay, we did have, no, I think given the time, it's probably time to wrap things up. We have had questions and comments throughout. If you have any questions right now, I'll try.
What's gonna be in part 3?
Part 3 is the Roberts family talking about
150 years.
150 years as a business in Columbus.
Because that's the day of the election.
Ooh.
Yeah.
We might need to take a look at that. So easy to look at a calendar and say, well, it's like a Tuesday, that's on the schedule. I would say we certainly over schedule.
Janet, is that okay?
I think so. It's okay with me.
Well, wait a minute.
George, how does that work with you?
Okay, so no hurt.
We'll be in contact. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Anybody else?
Yeah,
Well, thanks for your attention. I'm a little nervous about this. I haven't done this probably about 12 years now.
You did great.
You did fine.
Did a good